Okay, so you want to buy a KFC, not a two-piece meal. The whole operation, the fryers, the red and white building, the colonel's face on a sign you're not allowed to redesign. Here's the part nobody explains before you sign anything. The company behind KFC barely owns any real estate. No landlord games, no property empire sitting on the balance sheet. Just a royalty check and a recipe, which means every dollar of risk, the building, the land, the chicken prices, the labor bill, that's yours. All of it. And you're about to pay up to $3.8 million for the privilege of carrying it. Let's start with the sticker price, because it's not one number, it's a range. The franchise fee itself is $45,000, split oddly into two pieces, a $20,000 deposit and a $25,000 option fee, basically a reservation fee to hold your spot before you've built anything. That's the cheap part. The total investment splits into two very different tiers, according to KFC's own disclosure documents. Tier 1. Taking over and remodeling an existing outlet, converting a former restaurant instead of building from nothing. That runs $1,052,825 to $2,521,550, including the $48,575 to $50,500 you pay directly to KFC and its affiliates on top of everything else. Tier 2. Ground up new construction, buying raw land, building to spec, a full drive-through build, signage from scratch. That runs $1,852,825 to $3,771,550. The same corporate fees included. So depending on which door you walk through, you're financing anywhere from just over $1 million to nearly $3.8 million before you've sold a single drumstick. And that's not a one-time number. Brand standards change, and franchisees are periodically required to fund a remodel, new dining room, updated kitchen, refreshed signage, sometime in the middle of the 20-year agreement on Yum's schedule, not yours. And before you spend $1 on either version, Yum Brands, the parent company, wants proof you can survive the ride. Minimum net worth, $1.5 million. Minimum liquid cash reserves, $750,000, not total investment. Just the entry requirement to be considered. Then, once you're open, it's 5% of gross sales and royalties, plus another 5% into the marketing fund. 10% off the top, every week, whether you turned a profit that week or not. And that's before the costs nobody puts in the brochure. Mandatory training weeks at Yum's facilities, a required opening week ad spend commitment, and a POS and kitchen tech package you don't get to source cheaper on your own. Add another 5 to 6 figures before the doors even open. You don't pick your location, Yum does. Corporate runs the demographic models, traffic counts, competitor mapping, and they can veto a site you love because the math doesn't clear their threshold. You bring the money, they approve the geography. Once you're in, the building has to match spec. Kitchen layout, fryer brand, signage dimensions, paint code, none of it is negotiable, and most of the equipment has to come from an approved vendor list. You can't shop around for a cheaper fryer during a bad quarter, the list decides. The agreement usually runs 20 years. At the end, you renew and pay new fees to do it. And increasingly, KFC doesn't want single restaurant owners at all. Since the 2000s, the trend has pushed toward multi-unit operators, groups running dozens of locations because it's easier for Yum to manage 20 relationships than 2,000. The mom-and-pop KFC owner is mostly extinct. Getting approved isn't a formality either. Background checks alone run $575 to $2,500 per person, and the full process takes 3 to 6 months from first inquiry to signed agreement. Increasingly, Yum wants multi-unit operators willing to sign development agreements, committing to open 3 to 12 locations at $45,000 per outlet, an entry ticket of $135,000 to $540,000 before a single restaurant opens. It doesn't buy exclusivity either. Yum can still approve another franchisee inside the same market you just promised to build in. Here's the mechanism, and it's where KFC quietly does the opposite of the other giant fast food chain you've probably already seen a video about. McDonald's makes its real money as a landlord. It buys the real estate, leases it back to franchisees, and collects rent on top of royalties. So McDonald's profits whether the burgers sell well or not because the building itself is the asset. Yum Brands looked at that model in the 2000s and did the reverse. It spent years refranchising, selling off company-owned restaurants until more than 98% of KFC, Taco Bell, and Pizza Hut locations were independently owned. Yum kept the royalty stream. It handed you the real estate. So the machine works like this. Average US unit sales are around $1.6 million a year. Off the top, Yum takes its 10%, roughly $160,000 before you've paid a single wage or bought a single chicken thigh. Then food costs eat 28% to 32% of revenue, or roughly $448,000 to $512,000 a year. Labor takes another 25% to 30%, another $400,000 to $480,000. Add rent, utilities, insurance, management overhead on top of that. What's left on a well-run unit is $95,000 to $160,000 a year in net profit, a 6% to 10% margin. On an investment of just over $1 million to nearly $3.8 million, that's a payback period of 10 to 20 years before you've made $1 of actual return. Yum doesn't carry any of that downside. Whether your unit clears a 10% margin or barely survives at 2%, the royalty check is the same 10% off the top. The recipe is the asset. You're renting it. And that labor line isn't stable either. Annual turnover in the fast food industry now regularly exceeds 130%. The average quick service restaurant replaces its entire staff more than once a year. Every departure is a hiring cost, a training cost, a few weeks of a slower crew. None of that shows up as a clean line item. It just quietly eats the margin you thought you'd locked in. The chicken itself isn't really yours to control either. The 11 herbs and spices blend is split across suppliers on purpose. No single vendor holds the complete formula, so it can't walk out the door. You buy the finished mix from an approved supply chain at whatever price that chain sets. When feed costs spike or a bird flu outbreak hits poultry supply, your food cost jumps, but your royalty obligation doesn't move. 10% is 10%, good year or bad. That marketing fund, the other 5%, pays for the colonel's face on national campaigns you don't get a creative vote on. You fund it whether or not the ad actually drives traffic to your specific store, and traffic has been the problem. Through 2024 and into 2025, KFC's US locations saw monthly traffic swing down between 2% and 12% quarter to quarter, and same-store sales fell roughly 5% in the most recent year, largely because chicken sandwich competitors have been undercutting on value. A fixed 10% cut looks very different when it's 10% of a shrinking number. Layer delivery apps on top, commissions of 15% to 30% per order on top of everything else, and you start to see why franchisee math gets tight fast, even with a globally recognized name on the building. Meanwhile, the whole category has been racing to the bottom on price. Every major chicken chain has been running $5 and $7 value meal wars since 2023, trying to win back customers who traded down during inflation. Winning that price war means selling more units at a thinner margin. Great for defending market share, brutal for a franchisee whose royalty and marketing bill is fixed at 10% regardless of how cheap the combo meal gets. The origin story is one of the great flips in franchise history, and it almost didn't happen. Before the chicken, Sanders spent decades failing at other things. A short-lived law career that ended in a fistfight with his own client, a stint selling insurance that got him fired, jobs as a farmhand, a streetcar conductor, a railroad fireman. By the time he was running a gas station in Corbin, Kentucky in 1930 and started serving dinners to travelers on the side, he was well past the age most people call it quits. In 1952, that roadside restaurant was about to be wiped out by a new interstate bypassing his town. What he had left was a chicken recipe. He struck a handshake deal with the Salt Lake City restaurant owner, Pete Harmon, a nickel for every chicken sold. No lawyers, no paperwork. That single restaurant became the first KFC franchise. Harmon went on to invent the cardboard bucket, write the training manuals other franchisees used, and build what's still one of KFC's largest domestic franchise networks today, 300 plus locations across 4 states. When Sanders needed a buyer in 1964, Harmon helped fund the deal. By 1964, Sanders was 73 and ready to cash out. He sold the entire company to a group led by John Y. Brown Jr. and Jack Massey for $2 million, keeping a lifetime salary and the role of brand quality controller. The white suit and the string tie stayed, the ownership didn't. 7 years later, in 1971, Brown sold KFC to Hubline for $285 million. $2 million into $285 million. In 7 years, $85 million in 7 years. Sanders never saw a cent of that number. He'd already taken his check. Now the other side. EYM Group ran dozens of KFC locations across the American Midwest. Same brand, same recipe, same royalty terms as every other franchisee. In 2024 and into 2025, it filed for bankruptcy and closed more than 25 restaurants across Illinois, Indiana, and Wisconsin. The formula didn't fail. The unit economics in that market did. Bigger scale, same story. In February 2025, ESGTA, the master franchise operator running KFC across all of Turkey, filed for bankruptcy, with hundreds of restaurants closed, thousands of jobs lost, and 283 more locations announced for shutdown. Neither case was a single bad restaurant failing. It was an operator carrying debt across dozens of them. The same scale that's supposed to protect you from one bad location just as easily turns one bad year into a collapse across all of them. And then there's the risk nobody puts in a spreadsheet. In 2022, Yum exited Russia entirely, selling all 1,112 Russian KFC restaurants in a single transaction to a local buyer. Within months, every one of those buildings had been repainted and renamed Rostix. The brand you built a business around can be erased by a decision made in a boardroom you've never been in, and your franchise agreement doesn't protect you from that. Best case, you build in a solid mid-size market for around $1.8 million total. You hit close to that $1.6 million average unit volume, run a lean operation, and land at the top of the margin band, $150,000 to $160,000 net a year. Payback in roughly 11 to 12 years. After that, for the rest of your 20-year agreement, the location is a steady cash machine, assuming demand doesn't erode and Yum's cut stays fixed at 10%. Middle case, and probably the most common one, investment around $2.2 million, unit volume near that $1.6 million national average, net profit in the $95,000 to $120,000 range, payback around 18 to 20 years. You finish paying off the restaurant right around the time your agreement expires, and you decide whether to renew and start the clock over. Realistic case. Construction runs over budget and you end up closer to $2.8 to $3 million in an urban market, financed 70% to 80% through SBA loans at roughly 9% to 11.5% APR as of mid-2026, well over $150,000 a year in debt service alone. Add the traffic declines we're already seeing, and unit volume drops toward $1.2 million. After the fixed 10% off the top, food costs, labor, and that loan payment, you're netting something like $40,000 to $60,000 a year. Payback stretches past 25 years, longer than the franchise agreement itself. You either renew and pay new fees to keep going, or you're left holding a building that's only worth something to someone else who also wants to fry chicken in it. You'd think a business built by a 65-year-old man living on a $105 Social Security check and a chicken recipe would be simple to buy into. It isn't, because the Colonel sold the risk decades before you showed up. He turned $2 million into a lifetime salary in 1964 and let the company become worth $285 million without him. Everyone who's bought in since has been purchasing not a chicken restaurant, but a royalty obligation with a real estate problem attached. Put that same $2 million into an index fund instead, and history says you'd have made more money with a lot less time standing over a fryer. But then again, nobody's ever managed to put the S&P 500 in a bucket with 11 herbs and spices, so if you're still set on it, go in with your eyes open. Know which tier you're building, remodel or ground up. Know your real payback period, not the optimistic one. And remember that the company selling you the dream sold off its own real estate a decade ago for exactly the reasons you're about to find out the hard way.